Great. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. We went into the National Policy Forum in Nottingham this last weekend. I think with more than we might have hoped for. Our starting position was further ahead than we might have hoped for, and definitely what we would have assumed or guessed it would be 12 months ago. Following our win at conference and following the growing trade union support, I think this year has been, a really, in a way that we perhaps weren't able to predict in the same way as a conference win, has been a really important part of the campaign. And the impact that we've had through our CLPs and through the consultation phase has been really quite huge during that time. Such that when we got to the point where we have an opening text, the draft that was published in May, it already represented a step forward from where the party has been in the past. And as we went into the MPF, our biggest priority really was to protect that gain that we had already made. I mean, of course, we all want a properly clear statement about Labour introducing PR, and that remains our aim, and that's what we're going to be working for in the future. But our core objective, our most fundamental objective for the MPF was keeping that criticism first past post that has already been sort of conceded, if you like, in the draft text. And secondly, to actually get the party's formal sign off of that. Having it as the draft policy is one thing, having it now formally agreed by the MPF is another thing altogether. So it is a good outcome, and it is a step forwards that we secured those two things. We've kept the wording in. We have wording that says the flaws in the current voting system are contributing to the distrust and alienation we see in politics, going a long way beyond what the party has said before. It's a step forward. It's a statement that's been owned by the whole party. It's not just the electoral reformers of the party saying it. And I mean, another way of looking at it is it's a step forward for us, and it's undoubtedly a step backwards, a loss for our opponents in the party, those who do support first past the post, because they, along with representatives of the whole rest of the party in the MPF, have signed up to first past the post being a broken system in that sense. So now it's going to be basically the peg from which we hang our ongoing campaigning on. Labour has said there's a problem with the system and that it's causing these really serious problems. We have to challenge Labour not to be willing to just allow that to continue, to actually do something about it. So, I mean, first of all, just huge well done to everyone for your role in the campaign. Thank you very much. It sometimes feels like we've spent a lot of energy to sort of stay where we were, but the reality is we went into this with already a position which, if it was endorsed by the MPF, would be a win, and that's where we ended up. We're going to talk about how we got there. I'm just going to give a very sort of quick few words on that, and then I'll hand over to others. I mean, at a very high level, at the MPF in Nottingham, we had a workshop which was attended by all of the, or open to all of the tablers and seconders of amendments on electoral reform. In that room, we had about 2 to 1 in favour of PR support. So, reflecting, maybe understating a little, but still reflecting the very strong majority support there is across the Labour movement. We had a large trade union, GMB, defending first past the post. They had an amendment in favour of first past the post. We had one from an MP as well, and those arguments were being made in the room. It's not actually the workshop, though, that decides what happens to amendments. That goes to a plenary session at which, well over 200 members of the MPF all get to vote. And that's the room that really counts when it comes to deciding what is adopted into the party programme. I mean, this was a really highly sort of stage managed and quite carefully controlled meeting. There's a high likelihood that in that plenary, we just wouldn't have had necessary support in order to get our motion through. And you can look at all of the other issues that the MPF discussed. There was not a single one on which an alternative position reached that 35% threshold in order to be sent to conference as a sort of dissenting view. So not just democratic reform, any other policy at all. And it's extremely likely that ours would have fallen into that bracket as well, I feel. Yeah, I think I'll probably leave it there for now and hand over to Alex to talk us through some of the action in Nottingham and bring in some of our reps. And then I think, Laura, you're going to say a bit more about the sort of strategy and discussions that took place behind the scenes, the two parallel conversations. So Alex, do you want to go first? I think Alex might be frozen there.
I think Alex might be frozen. So whilst Alex is unfreezing himself or returning, it's been a long 4 days, we are going to come back more to this. But yes, Vicky, to answer your question, which I've spotted in the chat, Alex's internet has just cut out, by the way. You've said there's no commitment to PR. Can you be clear about this? Yes, we can be clear about it. What we're not going to do is do a press release saying so, because actually what there is a commitment for the first time ever across the whole of the party to the fact that the electoral system is bust. Now, anybody rational is going to say, well, if it's bust, you should have said you'd fix it. To which every single person on this phone call, unless they're a spy from the very small minority of the Labour membership who support first past the post, is going to agree. Like logically, the party said something's bust. Its next sentence should be how it's going to fix it. The bad news is we haven't yet got that next sentence, but the good news is we have got the first. There is now no hiding. There is no running away from this. We can talk, and as Joe said, we're going to talk a bit more about how we got here, to which I guess Vicky is going to say quite rationally how you only got here, and I would agree. But it's not where we wanted to go. It's not everything we asked for. We asked for a very clear commitment to PR for general elections. We didn't get it. However, the GMB and the other people who wanted a first past the post amendment not only didn't get that, they now have a party statement which says that the current electoral system is a cause of alienation and distrust. So I know we're not trying to spin our own supporters. Yeah, we would do spin for the media, and we would do spin in conversations with our detractors. This campaign, I think, has been so successful because it has been so straightforward and so honest. So this isn't a sort of spin that we're trying to persuade you all to go home and do cartwheels and whoops of joy. But I mean, I think Mary Southgate, who I can see in the middle of my screen, will tell you, and she's been at this for a very long time, that this is good news. Yeah, there you are. She nodded. Is Alex now back again?
I am back. Sorry, my internet went out there.
We'll come back now, Vicky, in a minute after Alex to the negotiations with the trade unions. By the way, I just keep saying Vicky because she's in the middle of my screen. To the negotiations with the trade unions and with Lotto. But we're now just going to reverse to Alex and the NPF reps to talk about the bit that the NPF reps did.
Yeah, and I first of all just want to say thank you to everyone that took part in all of the submission stage and in all of the regional meetings that we did over May. As you probably know, we had 11 regional calls with NPF reps all over the UK. And we had 9 amendments submitted, which, as Joe said, gave us weight of numbers in the room from CLP reps, from socialist societies, from unions, all calling for PR. So in the workshop stage, we certainly won the argument. And I'll pass to NPF reps in a moment who were in that room to share what their experience was of discussing it and what the arguments were that you came up against and how you found it. And I should also mention as well, we had a lot of media coverage. So Sharon, Duncan, Max were in the press arguing the case as well for PR in the run-up to that weekend as NPF reps. And in terms of what we were up to over the weekend, we pitched up on the Friday, made sure that all of our brilliant reps were briefed as much as they could be. I had physical copies of all of our briefings, and we had hostile Q&A and everything that they needed to go into those meetings prepared. They already knew the arguments backwards because they all really support PR and know what they're talking about. And there were 3 kind of potential stages at which they might have needed to fight for PR. The first was this workshop, second was what would have been an amendment meeting, and the third was in a plenary vote if it came to that. I'm conscious that we've got MPF reps here, and I want to give them time to share their experience of that workshop stage and the arguments that you came up against, and how you found talking about PR at the MPF, or anything else that you think would be useful to share of your experience over the weekend. And I know 1 or 2 of you also have other meetings that you need to get to, so I'm going to go to Duncan and then to Ruth, who isn't on my screen, but I'm hoping is still here.
Yes, thank you. So I haven't got any more news to tell than there's already been told, actually, but let me just give you a sense of the feeling in the National Policy Forum amongst delegates, if that's okay. So there was, one of the things about National Policy Forum is that there's quite a lot of hard talking in advance, and when you get face to face with shadow cabinet and the leadership and so on, things begin to move quite quickly. Because everybody is focused on trying to reach agreement. So in a number of different areas, there was agreement reached, and we had both sort of corridor conversations with Alex Norris, who was leading for the Shadow Cabinet, but also with other delegates and so on, as well as having the workshop itself. And the workshop was a funny mix, really. So you had the first past the post advocates led by the GMB making their case, but they were outnumbered quite substantially by people speaking in favour of our amendment or some wording. And there was an attempt to sort of reach some kind of compromise about what that wording would be. How positive we could be about proportional representation was the key final element, because in the end we were able to agree the first past the post criticism section, but in the end it was clear that we were going to have to slug it out with the remaining first past the posters. We may have been able to force that to a minority position, and even if we'd had the majority position and they'd had the minority one, that wouldn't have been as much of a step forward, to be honest, I think, than banking what we got. So we've done that. We've tested the waters with various people. The unions we know are on our side were very positive. The musicians union were particularly good, I thought, in the meeting, to be honest. I thought they did a great job. And people spoke from all different perspectives about it in favour of some form of proportional representation, and people started to talk more generally, not your core support and your people, about what that might look like, which I think is how this is going to now take that next step. So it's going to be what do we commit to and what do we commit not to. So, for instance, we were insistent on the constituency links, and that didn't really get raised. There was the old argument about Labour's only able to enact a socialist programme if you have a majority Labour government based on first past the post, because you'll never get it otherwise. And that was, but it was weak. I felt it was much more. I think there was a general sense in which the leadership didn't want to oppose PR, but they didn't want it to be an issue at the election. So they wanted cost of living to be the ground on which we fought, and they were trying to make sure that there weren't other distracting issues. And so getting the statement that we got in the policy seemed like the best outcome we could get on the weekend. I'm sorry it wasn't more, but that's that. And the good thing is that we now have a position, NEMCON vote, to support the wording that condemns or blames first past the post for the alienation and lack of trust, and makes noises in direction of reform. That's further than we were when we went in.
Thanks, Duncan. Yeah, we're certainly in a position now where the entire Labour Party has criticised the electoral system, which I think is really a good position to be in, and we've got some progress. Do any other reps want to share reflections on the workshop or on the weekend as a whole? Looking at Max, Sharon, Teresa. Go ahead, Max.
Yeah, I think that Duncan explained it well, but I was just quite positively surprised by the amount of, let's say, support we had in that room from people who are proposing other amendments unrelated to this. I've also had a bit of a chat with other delegates from, I think, Eastern Region and a bit of London people in the hotel on Friday night, and it seemed like it's like, well, what we already know, that there is a widespread support for PR in the party, and all in all, I'd say that this was a pretty good event, and let's keep it up. Let's keep the momentum up for the conference.
Thanks, Max. Sharon, and then we'll go to Teresa.
Hi, thanks, Alex. Duncan mentioned about the musicians union being sort of quite enthusiastic and sort of saying their bit at the workshop meeting. I'd also like to add ASLEF. They had a couple of their speakers who were very passionate. There were a number of people in the workshop meeting who aren't quite as keen as we are, but they did say, you know, it's not a first term issue, it's a second term issue. Maybe that's trying to kick it down the road, but I will take it on face value, because I had a conversation with a couple of people after that, and they are in favour of PR, just not in the first term, because we are going to inherit one unholy mess when we win the next general election. I would also say I was pressured before we actually got to Nottingham to withdraw the amendment, but I stuck to my guns so that Duncan and I were actually in the room, and it meant that, you know, it was at least 2-1 in our favour in that workshop meeting. It's not everything we wanted, but rather than trying to force a vote and not necessarily getting it through, and the danger of the first past the post lot getting theirs through, on balance, I think we did as well as we possibly could have done. Thanks.
Thanks, Sharon. And yeah, I mean, picking up that thing around the second term, first term, we're certainly pushing for it to be as soon as possible. But there are people who are perhaps supportive of PR, but just aren't feeling it as quite as urgently as us. But that's okay. We'll keep trying to convince them of the urgency of our cause. And we'll go to Teresa just to end with the MPF reps, and then we'll hand back.
Hi everybody. Alex knows, but a lot of you don't know, I was sort of came rather late to the party on this subject, and I use that, I hope, to good advantage in the meeting, because the MP moved all the old arguments with the amendment that they put forward. Actually, we won't get a strong Labour government. We won't be able to carry out our programme. They will, you know, will be held to fortune by extremists, etc. And that was a point that was taken up by GMB. But fortunately, from my position, I was able to say, well, actually, I'd argued that position for 52 years. but I changed my mind completely because the evidence from history and what's happened has actually shown that that position is entirely wrong. And I took everybody back to 1945 and said, well, where are we now compared to 1945? What's happened since? And it's because the current system's weighted in favour of the Tories, and every time they get elected, they go about undoing all the things that we've tried to do. So we now have an NHS, which is in a total mess, etc. I talked about trade union rights. I knew I wasn't going to, I didn't need to do any work, as Sharon has said, with the Musicians Union and ASLEF, but I certainly need to impress upon the GMB that the trade union, restricted trade union rights that they now enjoy have been largely due, in fact, totally due to the fact that the Tories in government have undone all the rights they had from the 1945 and 60s onwards. So that, I think, went down really well. It certainly went down well with the Musicians Union and ASLEF, because I could see them nodding vigorously in agreement as I was saying this. So I think sometimes it's about looking at your audience and touching the buttons that you know is going to generate a response. There were some really, really excellent responses by people. I commented on the fact that we have extremists in government already, and that was, and other people, I wasn't the only person who made that point, that the Tories have been taken over by their extremist wing. And so the old argument that we can't have PR because of the risk of, I mean, somebody, I think, some person in the room said that, well, we would have had Nick Griffin in Parliament if we'd had PR. So, yeah, I mean, really pulling out the real hardcore extremist position that we can't have PR because of the risk of a Nick Griffin type character getting elected, as if the rest of everything else that we want to do doesn't matter in the light of being of the threat from one single solitary person. I mean, I felt that was quite extraordinary, actually. There was a lot of work, and the comments about the fact that we did have a 2-to-1 majority, and I want to thank the team for all the coordinating and the backup and support. The pack that Alex handed to me when I tracked him down, I thought was exemplary and detailed. He's going to be all embarrassed now. I don't know if it was purely Alex who did it, but whoever was responsible for the briefing pack that we were given needs a huge pat on the back. It was absolutely brilliant. They went through forensically all the points for, all the points against, what position to take if this position was being argued, etc. I mean, the old 2-term, we need 2 terms, whereas in fact, some of us were arguing, well, we might not get a second term. This is a ridiculous argument to make. But anyway, I'd like to thank the team. I hope that those of you who are listening in to all of this feel that those of us who sort of held the mantle with that, we did our best for you. Because it was honestly, it was tough. But thanks for the backup from the team.
Thank you, Teresa. And honestly, yeah, I have to just say thanks to the reps again, because some of you have been lent on pretty hard not to go out and bat for what is the overwhelming consensus now across the Labour movement and among members and unions. So thank you for all of your hard work. And on the briefing packs, Teresa, that was definitely a team effort, I have to say. And also, yeah, just brilliant to have such a broad range of reps in the room, some of whom are like relatively recent converts to PR and some of whom have been supporters for years, because that has just meant that we were able to make the argument so much better in that workshop stage. I'm going to pass to Laura now, just before we go into Q&A and things like that.
Hi, thank you so much, and thank you to Duncan, Max, Sharon, Teresa, for speaking today, but also everything you did over the weekend. We know that you and lots of reps, you know, you made a big sacrifice to give up your weekend to go to rainy Nottingham. And we would just not have had the discussion that we had if you had not all not only gone there, but also put down the amendments. So we are enormously grateful to that. It obviously has been an extraordinarily sort of disciplined effort, starting right back from CLPs, putting motions to the conference, then all the submissions to the MPF. Thank you to all of you here who also were part of doing that through your CLPs. But ultimately it comes down to, you know, levers of power, really. So I just want to talk a little bit about the parallel discussions which happen. So you've got the workshop, as the reps have all explained, Alex and Joe, which is for all of the people who've put down amendments, proposed or seconded. And then ultimately there's a plenary session. And in between the two and before people even got to Nottingham, there are a series of discussions going on between the leader of the opposition's office, Lotto, and the major blocks. And as Duncan said, you know, everybody's focused on trying to reach an agreement, and reaching agreement is what sort of predominates in the thinking of many people, and sort of what they're agreeing sometimes is slightly secondary. Now, clearly not for us, because we're a campaign with a very clear vision, but many of the people who are in Nottingham, you know, they just wanted stuff agreed. Now, often those discussions, I mean, historically, almost exclusively, are dominated really between Lotto, the leader of the opposition's office, and the trade unions. And it is relatively unusual for a member-led campaign to insert itself in those negotiations in quite the way that we did. So we had significant discussions, you know, with people in and around the leadership in the run-up, and then during the whole of the weekend, whilst the team were in the room arguing, and you know, the campaign team were trying to find out what was going on because they weren't in the room, and others of us were sort of on the phone elsewhere. And it was pretty clear. And I think, you know, when Joe says that we went in with actually not bad text, I mean, the party's text, and you know, we know it's not all of what we wanted, but it was pretty clear that for Lotto was already a compromise as far as they were concerned. They had already given something. Now, they didn't give us enough, clearly, but I think that is already recognition of the fact that we had run such a disciplined and forceful campaign in the run-up to Nottingham that the leadership had already kind of factored in their own compromise. Now, we obviously made it very clear to them, alongside with the people in the room, in our own discussions, that, you know, conference has voted for more than this, and you know, we pressed all our arguments as hard as we could, but ultimately the small number of people who had put down a pro first past the post amendment, so essentially one of the major trade unions, there's prizes for guessing which one, begins with G, ends with B, and has an M in the middle, they were not going to withdraw their amendment, and they were not going to accept a compromise text. We had floated language during our discussions, which we thought would pick up on some of their concerns. Obviously, we were never going to concede their major point that they want first past the post, but we looked at their language around the constituency link, and I think Duncan made the point that they didn't even raise that in the workshop discussion, from which we conclude that in fact their opposition to PR is blanket. It doesn't matter what form it takes. The constituency link is probably used as a bit of a diversion or a red herring. The truth is they don't want it in any form. But we had tried to propose some language which took on board that concern, which pulled on the language that one of the other unions had put forward about learning from systems already in the UK. And it was clear that that was just not going to go anywhere. It was also clear that one of the unions who's got very pro PR policy was not going to prioritize fighting for it. So ultimately, the choice that the reps had, and the choice that we sort of in parallel, and obviously we were swapping information between us throughout all of this, had, was to either find a negotiated solution or end up in the plenary, as Joe said, with a first past the post amendment, the party's text, and our own text, and no indication that if we did get to that point, that any of the larger unions with apparently pro-PR policy would support it. Now, I think it was Teresa or Sharon mentioned ASLEF, and others spoke about how good the musicians union were. Without a doubt, we had some sterling support from 3 unions. Matt Rack of the Fire Brigades Union also, really did a big appeal for PR. But it is very hard to prevail in this kind of negotiation if you don't have a big union coming out for you. And so I think that we made the right decision. I think we decided that we would carry on our trajectory of winning. We have won this statement against first past the post. That is now the peg, as Joe said, on which all of our campaign will hang, and it is now party policy. So those of you producing leaflets and knocking on doors can tell people if you like. You probably better wait till conference has passed this in early October, when it is officially policy. But I hope that gives you a bit of a sense about the discussions that are happening in parallel. And I would say that we were very disciplined. We were we were everywhere that we could be, in every forum that we thought we could influence, and every conversation we thought we could get in. Thank you, Teresa, for your kind words about the briefing. I mean, I think the MPF reps were brilliantly briefed from what I've heard about the conversations you were having with people, both in the room and outside the room. There is literally nothing more that you could have done. And so we're enormously grateful for that. And frustrating though it is, this is a step forward. This is the right direction, and the Labour Party has now said it doesn't like the voting system. So I don't know if it's 0-0, but I'm convinced it's 1-0 to us in the long term. I don't think we can reverse out of this. It would be illogical, and the party would look ridiculous.